Steve, thank you very much indeed, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to Olympia, to this very first session of the day. Let me just give you the obvious sort of housekeeping stuff first. Everything you already know, basically stalls and stands around the room, covering pretty much every aspect, element and sinew of the property investment world. If you're thinking it, there's somebody out here doing it, so please visit as many stands as you can, have a chat, do a little bit of networking, just see what's out there if you haven't had a chance to have a look. But of course, wait till we finish this session before you dive out there and see what's going on. This session will predominantly work in a kind of Q&A fashion, so we'll hear from our panel first, and then we'll open this up to the audience, to you guys, to throw any questions in. As ever, we have scoured the country to find the best brains in the property world. We were not successful, but these four guys did, however, show up to join us. We are delighted to welcome Peter Littlewood from iHouse, Scott Marshall from Roma Finance, Mark Chick, Bishop and Sewell, and Richard Bowser, Property Investor News, all with us on the panel. And let's start with the obvious question. Today is budget day, of course. I know that landlords and investors love these moments. Is it going to be good news? Will it be terrible news? We'll talk a little more about that in a moment. We'll also talk about the looming election, which will mean a change of government. By all predictions, it seems that will be the case. What does that mean for this area, this industry, when a new government comes into power? But let's start, Peter, if we can, with kind of an overarching question, really, about 2024. How is it feeling out there? What's it looking like, and what are your predictions?
Well, 2024 is going to be an interesting year. As you already alluded to, we're going to have a general election. We will have a change of government. Whether it's the same colour remains to be seen, but there'll be new ministers, and unfortunately yet another new housing minister. And that's the big problem, because we get housing ministers, they only last a year if we're lucky. So it takes them a while to get bedded in. They get used to what they're doing, and then they think, well, I must put my mark on this, and they bring something new in, and then they moved on, and we start all over again. So what we would really like to see is a housing minister is going to stay for the duration of Parliament, 5 years, and to look at housing as a whole, not just rental, but look at housing as a whole. That would include things like borrowings and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just, it's a large subject there.
Is it 16 housing ministers or something like that?
It's roughly one a year.
Yeah.
I did a piece the other day, and I had to look up the number of housing ministers. And if you go back right to the 50s, we've had two who've managed to last. One lasted 4 years, one lasted 3 years. All the rest were a couple of years. So it's gone on for a very, very long time.
And it's extra if you consider the importance of that role, not just in the world of landlords and investment and property, but just in housing. I mean,
yeah.
It almost feels like a very junior position when people talk
yeah.
about the housing minister. And one would assume this would be a portfolio in government that's about as important as it could be.
Yeah, I mean, the last housing minister we had who actually did a proper job and looked at it as a whole, you've got to go way back to 1952, Harold Macmillan. I know this because I've just done some research on it.
Who did build 300,000 houses a year.
He succeeded in the 300,000 a year. Yeah, he was the only one that did it. He was asked by Churchill to do it. He thought it was a junior position, but his attitude was, it's an important position, I'll give it a good go. And he did.
And he did it. And then got the big job afterwards.
Yeah, indeed. But as you say, I don't know why it's treated as a lowly job. It's a very important job.
As important as it gets, really. I mean, Scott, in terms of, we've been here many times over the last couple of years wondering what the next year is going to look like. Stability and a sense of confidence is really key to this industry. Do you think we'll get any of that in 2024, given what's happening?
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you, first of all, some bad news, and I'm going to then flip it around as to, good news for 2024. So, as at the end of February, almost 2% of all direct debits are bouncing.
Wow.
Okay, so that gives you a flavour of the stress that is currently in the economy that people are not seeing. And what happens is, first of all, people stop paying, I should say, their unsecured credit, and then later on, as they can no longer afford the unsecured credit, they then stop paying the secured credit. So there is a problem that's coming down the track, and there's still 1 million people to come off fixed rate mortgages that are going to get a payment shock during 2024. So my expectation is that base rates are likely to come down, and to come down quickly, in order to stimulate the economy once all this bad news starts kind of flowing out into job figures. And I think everything is around the unemployment rate. So once unemployment starts to increase, so base rate will come down, irrespective of what happens over in the States, in order to stimulate the economy. And I also think there will be material pressure from the existing government on the Bank of England in order to reduce rates to stimulate the economy ahead of a general election. And I know they're supposed to be independent, but we all know what the reality is. So that's the bad news. The good news is, for the people that are in this room who are property professionals, who are landlords, the current climate represents better buying opportunities because there are more distressed vendors. And every business is the same, no matter what line of work you're in. If you're a factory producing widgets, if you are a property professional buying property, if you're a non-bank lender buying money to lend out, every business is about the same thing. If you can buy well, you can sell well. Okay, and the current climate will offer professional landlords and professional property developers an opportunity to buy property, to buy land better.
And do you sense, just a final point, Scott, that will go on for a couple of years, that sense that it's a good terrain for the investment industry?
Well, so I think that there is a window of opportunity, which is now, because once the base rate does start to come down, there'll be a load more people that will flood into it. Okay, so actually you do your best business in a counter-cyclical environment. We are in a counter-cyclical environment now. So, from a personal perspective, I'm buying, I'm looking to buy. And so, if you effectively, what you do, you buy cheap, you sell high. You don't buy high and sell cheap.
Yeah.
So it's likely there'll be inflationary pressures on property prices once base rate starts to come down, as more competition comes back into the market to buy property. Because the fundamentals are still the same, which is there's not enough property for too many people.
Mark, same question to you. What is your sense of 2024? What's it looking like?
So I'd probably echo some of the things that have been said already. I think the government is set to try to win an election, and we've talked about what might come next in terms of whatever political hue the next government might have. And as part of that, I think we're seeing an express train of legislation heading towards the statute books in the run-up to that. And I think that's going to be a big factor in 2024, because we don't know when the election's going to be. We know it's going to be in the second half of the year, whatever that means to us. But I think there's a big load of stuff going on in leasehold reform with the leasehold and freehold reform bill. That's going to have a lot of impact in the management space as well as in the short lease market. So those that might want to buy leases and then extend them are going to find perhaps they're handed a bit of an inadvertent windfall there. But I think also, if you look at what's happening with the Renters Reform Bill, that's obviously a big point of concern to landlords, because the abolition of Section 21 is something which will lead to a complete change, a game changer in the way that the rentals market's going to work. And all lettings will be seen to be much more long-term, because tenancies are going to be deemed to be periodic tenancies. But we're not at a point where that's actually coming near the statute book yet. And the latest we have on that, it went to a third reading, it went to select committee stage. It's jammed in that point at the moment. So, will that come in before the next election? I don't think it will. There's a bit of a contretemps between Angela Rayner and Michael Gove. Michael Gove said, yes, we will bring this in answer to a question from Labour, but actually, Will that hit the statute books? I'm not sure. I'll be interested to hear what the other members of the panel think about that, actually. So, if as a landlord, as an investor, I agree with a lot of what Scott's saying. I think there's a time of opportunity because we're in a difficult economy, but we're going to face a different regulatory environment as well. So it's going to be really important to have all that in mind when making those investment decisions.
And similarly as well, Richard, 2024, big year. I've referenced the budget today. I'm sure we will return to the budget news shortly. But in terms of the year ahead, an election pending, and all that goes with it, what are you feeling, levels of confidence, and what are your predictions?
Well, there's definitely, since November, there is a rising sense of confidence, but also absolutely a degree of uncertainty. Clearly, the election is a bit of a shadow. I'm not overly concerned about the prospect of the red corner getting in, because in terms of the implications, in terms of landlordism, in terms of the private rented sector, this is an amazing market to be in at the moment. Just because of the fundamentals and what's been building or not being built. We've got a net 1.25 million extra people in the UK. 90% of them rent when they come in the UK. So that's an extra, the supply relative to the demand is really what it's all about as far as private rented sector is concerned. We haven't been building enough homes. The cost of debt has risen considerably, as we know, because of the Quartane Trust budget. But it's not peculiar to the UK, the rising level of debt and the consequences of that. And home ownership is more out of reach than it was. Will politicians be able to change that? I mean, Peter made some comments about housing ministers. I mean, that must be the poison chalice of a position in government, which is why they probably want to get out of that. When they get the opportunity, they grab it, they get the title, they get the car and all the little perks. But, quite frankly, what are they able to do to actually change anything? We don't have enough people to build the properties. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of ex-EU people went back and didn't come back post-COVID. We don't have the builders. The cost of materials for development is all of these factors just comes back to, from the point of view of you guys as private landlords, you are in a business. If you can get your ducks in a row and you get your numbers right, the prospects for the next 5+ years are, in my opinion, very, very positive.
Do you think, Mark, in terms of housing prices, for example, the obvious marker in this debate, whether people are buying domestically or whether they're purchasing for investment, what do you think is going to happen to house prices? Are they likely to remain as they are? Are they going to go down a tad? Are they going to go up a bit?
The latest stats on that are that house prices remain reasonably resilient. It's quite interesting. There was a rollback in prime central London, but if you're not in that market, and that market's stabilised as well, I think there is, the latest data shows, that despite the flagging economy, property prices themselves have been reasonably resilient. Are we going to see significant increases? I'm not sure we are. I think that depends on a number of different factors, because there could be other things that will release more stock into the market. We've talked about the million people who are going to come to the end of fixed-term loans, which are probably quite favourable. They're very low interest rates. I mean, many people in the room might have that situation now. And then there could be a situation where suddenly there is, not an explosion, but a slower and increasing trickle of property coming back into the market. Couple that also with perhaps some of the other help and support that the government's tried to provide in relation to things like utility bills. And if the employment situation was less resilient, suddenly you might see a situation where things begin to roll backwards. However, speaking as somebody who runs a firm that has got a conveyancing team, we have seen no let-up. There's no shortage of people wanting to buy property. So people with assets who want to invest are able to do so. And I think that's something which is continuing. And returns, rent, as you will have known very well, everyone in this room will know this, rental returns have been significant because there's over-competition for space, and there continues to be so. It's simply a supply and demand logistic. So it's about your own personal margins in that space, but actually the rental market is ever resilient, ever onwards, I think, and upwards.
Same point, Scott. It's back.
It is highly unlikely that there's going to be a property price crash, because the fundamentals are that the weighted average loan to value across mortgage properties in the UK is only 40%. The banks and building societies are far better capitalised than they were in 2007, meaning that effectively the capital strength of those businesses, together with the low risk, given the weighted average LTVs are so low, mean that banks can afford to give their customers forbearance to allow them to trade through, either through assisted sale programs if they're struggling and not going to get back on their feet, or to effectively capitalise the arrears and put them into a new product or extend the term of their loan. So you're not going to see that many distressed sellers who are homeowners. Where you are likely to see distress actually is in the buy-to-let space, okay? Because people would have been encouraged to get very high loan-to-values on their buy-to-let mortgages, and although rents have gone up, you're relying on the tenants making the payments, together with, if rents have gone up 30%, 40% since 2021, actually, if we think of what's happened to interest rates are almost 5,000% higher than they were in October 2021, before the first base rate rise when it was 0.1%. So there is distress in the buy-to-let sector at the moment. But the fundamentals are still there. So I think it's unlikely we're going to see material property price devaluations. The other thing to say is that, again, from a sort of landlord's perspective, as long as you have got a product which is available in what we call a liquid market, so urban areas where there is demand, and you're near schools, roads, hospitals, infrastructure, universities, where people want to live and want to rent and where there are jobs, then you should be absolutely fine.
Okay. Let's just, before we throw out for questions, excuse me, from the audience, just a brief word, if we can. Peter, confidence in a new government coming in. So it's likely to be a Labour government. Historically, or maybe stereotypically, because people would say, well, the Blair government was not like an old socialist government in the conventional sense, so they were very business friendly. Keir Starmer wants to pick up the mantle in the same kind of vein, but there will be some people who get the wobbles because they'll think, hang on, it's Labour, they're a little more to the left, therefore they won't, the word landlord is like a klaxon going off in their left-wing ear hole, and they'll start to discombobulate on the trot, thinking, my goodness, landlords, these are the antichrists of the business world. That's the stereotype. What's the reality? How are you seeing it, Peter? Do you feel confident that Keir Starmer will continue as, or hopefully pick up the pieces and become a friend of the landlord, or will he be an arch enemy?
Well, the answer is, you can turn me up, can you hear it? Right, the answer is we don't know. We've got a Conservative government who seem to be acting like a Labour government, and we don't know why. The point we as a landlord association keep trying to get across to all politicians are, because successive governments have failed to build social and council housing, they are now forced into the situation of accepting the private rented sector. But they hate the private rented sector. Why? And you good people are providing homes, and they are homes to people, at your risk, your financial risk. Not risk to the government, not risk to the local authority, and they just don't seem to realise that. So, you know, history does tend to repeat itself. We had this kind of situation in the 70s when, not quite as bad as possibly we might get now, but landlords were getting bashed. And then in the middle to late 80s, the Prime Minister of the day, can't remember her name, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. The Prime Minister of the day sort of basically said, where are all the landlords? Not worth being a landlord, they're there to earn money. And that's what we've got to get over. It's there as a business, we earn money by being a landlord. If we can't earn money by being a landlord, we'll go and, I don't know, we'll go and publish magazines or something. So that's an easy job, isn't it? So, you know, it'd be something like that. We'll do something different. And then again in 10 years' time, whoever the Prime Minister then is, goodness knows who it'll be, they will be saying, well, where's the private rented sector? We desperately need them.
Indeed.
And it will all turn around again. The thing I would say to all of you is, the word's been used once already, be professional. It's the professional people, keep an eye on everything you're doing, watch carefully what you're doing, be exceptionally careful when you take prospective new tenants on, because it's a lot easier to look at them then and at the end, particularly in the future. So those people are professional, they survived in the 70s, you can do it again. There's no space now for the part-time landlord. It's a full-time job,
Okay.
quite frankly.
Richard, same question, just about the confidence. A change of government, does it scare you, does it enthuse you, or will it not make a blind bit of difference?
Well, I think I've already answered that earlier in the comments. I'm not particularly concerned about the prospect of a Labour government. I mean, clearly there's a lot of rhetoric, understandably, from both sides in respect of, tenant votes, because the numbers are very simple. There are 11.5 million tenants, and there are a couple of million landlords. So from a politician's perspective, they're chasing votes, and obviously they're understandably going to pay far more attention to the likes of generation rents and the tenant interest groups than they are to the RNLA. I mean, that's just a reality. But once they're in power, then they've got to face the reality, as we've said, that we've got a fundamental shortage of rental property because of the rise in interest rates, etc. It's much more difficult for people to get on the housing ladder now than it was. It's never been easy, despite, so I'm not that actually overly negative about the prospect of a Labour government.
Scott, I mean, same question. What are your feelings on the impending change of administration?
So housing is going to be front and centre of the next general election campaign, whichever party is vying for votes. And I think that what Labour will do, if they do get into power, their manifesto will be around putting investment into building a new type of council estate, a new type of social housing, and I think that is likely to be around the green belts, which is kind of why they're kind of dipping their toe in the water to see what the public's reaction is to building on green belt land. There's advantages from a Labour perspective insofar as you've got high value properties on the edge of green belts generally, so creating social and affordable housing also impacts the kind of levelling up sort of strategy. I think we're also going to see a lot more investment in the so-called 15-minute town, the 15-minute city, the regeneration of the high street, in order to bring valuable revenue into local authorities, because we've seen local authorities are struggling at the moment. So I think actually, from a property investor's perspective and a property developer's perspective, there is nothing to be fearful of from a changing administration. I think that the point that the chap at the end has made around there being 11 million landlords and 11 million tenants and 2 million landlords, absolutely is spot on. And I think that there is likely to be a continued war on the private rental sector, because they tend to be mostly Tory voters anyway.
And Mark, same question to you. What are your thoughts about a change of government?
So I think there are some interesting things to think about there. I think if you look at what's gone on at the minute, the Competition and Markets Authority has been asked to look at house builders. We've talked about the limit of supply of housing into the market, and both the speakers here have mentioned that this morning. One thing we might hope for from a new government would be a wider and broader perspective, perhaps, on housing policy and housing need, and that might focus on some of the things we touched about concerning the length of term of appointments of housing ministers. I think we've had something like 13 or 14 housing ministers in the last 10 years. It's a ridiculous number, given that property is a long-term asset class. It's not a 5-minute investment. And I think it's time that government woke up to that and actually said, look, we need to look at housing need and housing planning properly. So I wonder whether a fresh administration might take some of that on board and actually carry on some of the work that, say, the CMA has done, perhaps recognise there might become a long to medium-term divergence in terms of people's ability to own a property, and maybe we're going to see a situation a little bit more like other bits of Europe, where perhaps becoming a renter is more normal, and therefore for landlords it's good news because there'll be a certain number of people. I mean, you've hit the ratio on the head already. You've got 11 million people renting and 2 million people owning those properties. Maybe that's the market will become more institutional, more developed perhaps. And if you increase security of tenure for people taking tenancies, which is what some of these proposed renters reforms would do, they would see a stabilisation in that market. So actually from an investment point of view, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. It might be that we see a longer term, less ability to change rents more quickly, but longer term stability in that market, which from a property investment point of view might not be a bad thing. So I wonder, with a new government, whether we'll see some of that, or whether, as you've been saying, perhaps they won't have time to do any of that. So I wonder also, if in doing that, they might then also look at how they incentivise people to enter that market, be that through some other kind of tax adjustments or capital allowances or some other changes, because strangely, this government and the successive three governments have actually closed the net on landlords quite significantly, made it much tougher to make money in this part of the market. And actually, perhaps, if housing needs to be tackled from two ends, from a policy end and a supply end, it might be time to release some of that. But there'll be a challenge.
Which is interesting that they have closed the net, given the point that Peter made at the beginning, that it is the private rental sector that is propping up the housing issue at the moment, because without that, I mean, there's no other houses being built with any significant impact. Let's just take a straw poll of our audience on that very same question of a new government coming in. It's likely to be a Labour government. Does that fill you with, can we just get a show of hands on this? Are you more confident in the next government being better for the landlord investment industry? Can we have a show of hands on that? Wow. Where's Keir Starmer when you need him? It'd be interesting for him to see that. Having said that, just in the interest of a little bit of balance, how confident are you that the current Conservative government are friends of the landlord investment industry? You see, it's pretty much the same. That I think is quite telling.
You've said it all.
And I think if you, just to expand that point, I think if you fired that question out to lots of different industries, people have got a very real sense at the moment that the government are just not speaking the language of real people, whether they are in an industry such as this or something else. But this just happens to be crucial. Let's get some questions from our audience to our panel.
I agree with 90% of what the panel have said here, but the problem is this government, and I don't think Labour will be any different, they're anti-landlords. The outlook for small landlords like me, I own about 70 flats, shops, industrial estates. I'm not a small landlord, but the outlook is not good. First thing is, interest rates, we've all been used to very, very low interest rates. Historically, when I started, I paid my mortgage when it was 17%. Historically, they're 6%. People think you can get away with 2-3% rates. That's not normal. And, I'm 60 years old. I've been in this game a long time. But we got a government, whoever it is, Labour or a Tory, they're anti-landlords. Where I live, just outside of London, 15 minutes from the centre, the banks are buying 30% of any development. They are the new landlords. The banks are now in this business. And we're hanging on by the skin of our teeth. There's no good outlook for us, not with the tenants. The problem, tenants can't afford the rents. The rents have gone up. I put some of my rents up this morning. Some of them had said, no problem. Some of them said, we can't afford it. We'll give you a month's notice. And I've said, no problem. Because there is the demand there, but the problem is the economy cannot support the rental prices. My daughter lives in Canary Wharf. She pays £3,000 a month for a one-bed flat. Most people can't afford that. The problem is, it's a politics thing. Rents aren't affordable no more. Most people earn £1,200, £1,600 a month. That's the problem. Well, the outlook isn't good for small landlords.
Got it.
Hello, questions, please.
Hi, question to the panel. Great to hear all your perspectives. I read a statistic on the way in here that in Scotland, the market has lost 22,000 landlords because the environment is so hostile towards landlords. They've also got rent controls up there in some of the major cities. What's your perspective on that figure? First question. Then secondly, have you got any up-to-date stats for England and Wales to reflect that figure in England and Wales to match the Scottish figure?
Okay, let's get some answers to some of those, shall we, Steve?
Yep.
Yep.
So, Richard.
Hello. Yeah, Louis, sorry. Yeah, so I think the 22,000 was put out a few weeks ago. If that's the stat and it's an accurate stat, wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, rent controls, very controversial, brought in Scotland and continued. But bizarrely, despite rent controls, rent freezes, rents in Glasgow, Edinburgh and most of Scotland are the highest increases anywhere in the UK in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So bizarrely, rent freezes, rent controls have led to even higher rents in Scotland. Yeah. Because what's happening, of course, as soon as a new tenant comes in, because people's circumstances change, the landlords are obviously ratcheting up the rent, understandably, because they've been frozen. As far as the UK is concerned, England and Wales, numbers-wise, there's certainly, despite all the rhetoric, yes, there's been a loss of private landlords, but there's also, at the same time, been people coming in. But of course, the supply-demand situation is there's just so many more people looking to rent and so many more people unable to buy because of the rise in rates. And going back to the comment earlier, I can't remember, it's Scott, I think you made a comment about or where rates are now. Come on, 20, whatever it is, years ago, 2005 to 2007, we had a very significant property price boom across the whole of the UK. And where were rates then? Well, they were 5 or 6%. So pretty much we had the same interest rate environment in 2005 to 2007. And now we're all going, oh my God, this is a crisis. Rates are rocketing there. This is the norm. But of course, what's happened, we've all adjusted to that 300-year low period when bank rate was 0 point not a lot. And we've got used to being able to borrow a 5-year fix at 1.8 or 1.7. But that was not the norm, and now we're into an environment which is very, very different. So this is an adjustment process. Like it or not, we're in a different era, and we have to adjust to it. And I can't remember who said earlier about, I think it was this gentleman here, about landlords and interest rate environment. People have over-leveraged, and they've been led to over-leverage, and they've got carried away. I call it stretching the elastic band of optimism, and that's always causes businesses to contract. It's what brings every single property developer crashing, and lots of them have been burnt in the last few years. So, people have got carried away. If you want to secure your businesses as landlords, just make sure that you get your debt levels down over a period. You're in a long-term business. And if you're 85% loan to value, then you need to get that down to a level which is manageable for the medium to long term, and you can mitigate risks.
On that same point, Scott, it's an what was said there is said so often. Is it a recalibration? Because there's an irredeemable reality here that we have an increasing population that is increasing at a slightly higher rate. At the moment, it might calm down. We have a massive demand for rent. We have fewer properties. This is all basic mathematics. A 10-year-old could work this out. Therefore, rents go up. But there is a point, 3,000 quid a month for a one-bedroom flat. If you told somebody that 10 years ago, they'd have thought you were barking mad. This is all in recent times. There is a sense that something's got to give here. Otherwise, as you said, we're just going to have banks come along and say, well, we'll be the supreme landlord. We become the supreme landlord, and there's one or two stragglers at the back that are joining in. Is this a real warning period? Is it just a case of a recalibration of things like interest rates and expectations that's needed?
Yeah, no, I actually think it's forgive me, but I think it's more serious than that. And the reason why I say it's more serious than that is there are sectors in the economy at the moment that are experiencing real distress. So construction and anything related to construction, interior design, basically people's disposable income has materially gone down because of a rising cost of living environment. And what's happening is people are struggling, as you know, if 2% or almost 2% of direct debits are bouncing, then it's only a matter of time before, and unless something happens to reverse the cost of living heightened environment that we're in, it's only a matter of time before the demand for people to pay high rents on property will fall. And so we're in this, I think that we are in, again, this is why I say that the time to do business is now, because there are fantastic buying opportunities, because there are distressed sellers out there who are struggling to afford. You know, if you've got a tenant, for example, if you've over-leveraged and you've got a tenant who's not paying your rent, you can't pay your buy-to-let mortgage. And we're seeing levels of arrears go up in that space, which is why landlords are looking to get out of that, or part of the reason why landlords are looking to get out of that space. Increased regulation, increased tax, rent reform bill, fear of a changing government, etc. So from a property professional's perspective, actually it's going to be more exciting to be a developer than it is to be a landlord going forwards.
Okay. Peter.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is to go back to the original question, are people leaving the industry in England? What we're tending to find is that when buy-to-let started sort of 20, 30 years ago, it was people of my age, the baby boomers, who were buying in, and now they're getting to retirement age. They may have wanted to last another few years, but they're basically saying, can't be bothered anymore. You know, now's the time to get out. They're the people who are tending to get out because they want to retire. But there's an awful lot of younger people who are coming into the market, and it's good. I mean, in terms of Scotland, I was talking to John from the Scottish Association of Landlords. Did I get that right, Salves? 18 months, 2 years ago. We were talking about the Renters Reform Bill and what it might do down here. And he was saying they've had two problems up there. Yes, they've had the problem with the Section 21. They've actually managed without that, with difficulty. The bigger problem that everyone seems to be ignoring, and it could happen down here, will happen down here, is the loss of the fixed term. That's the big problem. So you've got permanent tenancies, and the fact that the tenants can give too much notice, possibly at any time. That's what's caused huge problems. It's decimated the student situation in Scotland, and it will undoubtedly decimate the student situation here as well.
Mark, we're going to go back as well to our question in a second.
On the lady's point there,
just a broad response.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think if you look at what's happened in Scotland, as I understand it, one of the grounds on which the landlord can get the property back is they want to sell it. Because if the Renters Reform Bill is implemented, some of the changes would be there'll be limited circumstances in which you can take back possession. You won't be able to put up the rent. But of course, what's happening there, I think, is a lot of people are saying, well, okay, here's a renewal, therefore we put the rent up as high as possible. They're also saying, okay, now I'm going to manufacture a situation in which I'm going to sell this property so I can take back possession, and therefore they're ending the tenancy, and that's causing this increased demand. So you're seeing people leaving the market because they think, well, that's now the new way of breaking the tenancy, increasing demand and putting rent up. So that the ray of hope for England might be that if the government looks at that, the impact of that market now, and says, well, should we do that with the Renters Reform Bill here? Actually, no, we might need to pause for thought before we do bring that in, because it's what you might call the law of unintended consequences. It looks good on paper, you create this long-term stable tenancy, but then suddenly you've created another problem in the market. So I wonder if that is something which might be something that comes up, and I think that bill might not, if it doesn't make it onto the statute books as a living, breathing instrument before an election, I think a Labour government would look at that quite carefully, given those impacts.
Back to your optimism for the small landlord, how can anybody, and I can only speak from the southeast, where we are near London. 1 bedroom flat where I live is 400,000. You need to put down a 40% deposit. If you want to go and get 85% borrowing, you're going to be trouble. You cannot borrow money to make that a viable business. You can't buy any new builds. They're 400 grand for a new build, one bed. Some are 700 grand for a 2-bed, 3-bed.
So unless you're cash rich,
and there's not many people that are.
Correct.
And even if you are, say you have some money in the bank, you've put down a decent deposit, you'll have to run that business, run that property, find your tenants, and try and make a profit out of it. It's impossible. So I don't share the panel's optimism that the outlook is good, because we've all agreed there's not going to be a price crash. I don't think there will be. There'll be a stabilisation in new builds because they're overpriced, especially these tall skyscrapers. They will be the slums of the future. They might be highly priced now, but they'll be Grenfell Towers of the future. They'll be full of immigrants and homeless people. That's what's happening with these big skyscrapers. Now, I don't have this optimism this panel shares, because you can't buy anything where I live for that money.
We're in a kind of we're in a sort of cul-de-sac. Just briefly, Scott, on that point, it's the kind of the missing episode of Squid Game. There's no way out of this. Whatever way you look at it, there's something in your way, whether it's high prices, whether it's unrealistic deposits required, rules and regulations. This is just not an industry that can work any longer.
I think what you'll find is I've agreed with everything that you've said, in that there is, with the stress that's in the economy at the moment, when you look at the Experian data, the Equifax data, the direct debit data, there is stress in the economy. And the only way, look, there is a window of opportunity to do business now, I believe, because of the distress. Once interest rates start to come down and money gets pumped back in, all of a sudden that will be I think that will be inflationary. So I believe prices will go up. So therefore, I believe there's a window of opportunity for people to buy property, which is now.
Get just a word on the other question, when you were talking about scams. If I've heard that correctly, you're talking about people who offer the full package of everything. We can look after your money, we'll find the property, we'll do X, Y, Z. On that point, Richard, I mean, it is an area where some people very successfully specialise in. We're an umbrella organisation that will look after everything from sourcing your property, finances, mortgages, tenants, management, insurance, taxation. We'll do the lot. I think this gentleman was saying, how do you find a good guy from a bad guy? There's a lot of scammers out there in this industry who want your money.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I've been publishing property investor news for 22 years. I've been coming to shows like this since 2001. And, unfortunately, property does attract certain types of people. And the problem nowadays, of course, is social media and the internet, and your ability to project an impression to millions of people. And it can be a false impression, which is why the whole due diligence, the whole robust research around sourcing and finding people that you can trust is just so important. Because it's so easy now to project, the wrong impression. The whole, we look now on Instagram, and this is part of the problem with the modern world now. We are all doing this, aren't we? Our attention span is just tiny because we're being bombarded with information from every conceivable angle. And so, but at the same time, it's like an insurance policy. Read it. And we don't, do we? We get it, and it's a 60-page document. But at the end of the day, it's your digital signature, yeah? And if you don't read the small print, then unfortunately, you're at risk.
It's about doing your homework, really. There's no way around it. Yeah. Due diligence, do your homework.
Due diligence, yeah.
We are going to take some other questions. Can we keep them snappy, just for time? We've got around about 15 minutes left, so it'd be nice to get as many types of questions in as possible.
Can I ask the panel, sorry, I got here late, so I hope this wasn't covered before, but about the increase in the local housing allowance, which was announced, I think, at the autumn statement, hasn't been increased since.
Do you want to take that one, Mark?
It's not something I've got a particular view on in terms of the actual. We were talking about you said housing allowance given to. So do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
No, not a problem. Go for it, Peter.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would say about local housing allowance, I think it really echoes what I said earlier on, which is government not treating housing with sufficient respect. It's just a way, how can we save money? Oh, we'll chop the housing allowance, without looking at the unintended consequences of doing that. You know, the poor people who rely on housing allowance, whatever you want to call it, they're completely stuck without that, and they're the ones that are going into debt, and it's causing problems. So it's this overall view, a housing manager should have control of local housing allowance, quite frankly. It should not be with the Treasury.
Okay. Another question coming in. Steve's just making his way towards. Stick your hand up if you've got a question.
And please do shout.
Yeah, shout as loud as you can.
Very quick question about buy-to-let lenders. It seems to be almost a cartel in the buy-to-let market where if you want a certain loan amount, you have to take a 5-year fix. But there's nobody offering variable rate mortgages, or very few, especially in the specialist buy-to-let market. And I wonder, do you think is something going to happen about that? Can there something happen in the industry to make that possible?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lack of flexibility in that.
Yes, basically why the question is, why are there not variable rate buy-to-let mortgages anymore? Everyone seems to be offering fixed rate buy-to-let mortgages.
He's got better hearing than me.
What?
You got better.
Yeah. Well, I think because I could see his face, I could read his lips. Right. Is that the right question? Yeah. Okay. So, from a Roma perspective, we only offer variable rate mortgages, buy-to-let mortgages. We don't offer fixed rate buy-to-let mortgages. The reason why lenders generally only offer 5-year fixed rate mortgages is because of the PRA rules around affordability and stress testing. Because normally what happens is, as a lender, you are regulated and you are required to stress test at a certain percentage above the pay rate. Okay, but if you're over 5 years, so if you're offering a fixed rate of a fixed rate term of a fixed loan period of 5 years, then you only need to stress test at the pay rate, not a percentage above the pay rate, and that's why five-year fixed rate mortgages, buy-to-let mortgages, have become so popular.
Do you want to come back in on that point as well?
You've hit the nail on the head, although there are many lenders that offer 2 and 5-year fixes. You're quite right, that the reason why many people and their brokers and the lenders have the 5-year is because of the stress testing, because of the interest rate coverage. So that's why people go for the 5-year fixes. What is very interesting about where we are now compared to when people thought we would be 3-4 years ago in terms of house price crash potential is that it's because so many people are on fixed rate deals, not just buy-to-let landlords, but private owner-occupiers, that they are on long-term fixes, that we've not had a massive a massive house price downturn, because going back to 2008, the vast majority of people were on variable rate mortgages. So when the base rate changed, your rates adjusted accordingly. It was the same in 1989, 1991. So, but now we've got this gradual problem with people coming off fixed rate mortgages, off of a 1.5, 1.6 onto a 4.5, which has cushioned the impact of the interest rate rises.
I hope you will make a team to tackle the government who run landlords down. You should advertise all bad landlords as well as all bad tenants, because the renters are expert. They bring parents in when they are not in the contract, and they cause a lot of damages, and the landlord foots the bill. Enough is enough.
Right, so what you're saying, exposing, having like a bad landlord register and a bad tenant register?
I mean, this one it's come up, Steve, hasn't it, a couple of times over the years. It's all very well, people, there's certain news organisations that love to find a bad landlord and then pretend that is a typical picture no other group would you get away with stereotyping in such a spectacular fashion. But what about tenants on that point, Scott? It's a reasonable point. There are some terrible tenants out there as well.
Yeah, there are. Look, you know, as lenders, regulated lenders, the directors and the owners of those lenders have got to be approved by the FCA in a senior manager's regime, okay? And they face consequences if they don't treat their customers properly, okay? And there is no reason why there can't be a similar law for rogue landlords and also rogue tenants, because we all need we all want to do good business with good people.
I think we can get another question in, Steve. There was a gentleman at the front. Might be able to get a couple more in.
You've all spoken about the need for professionalism in the private rented sector. I'm just interested to hear your views on licensing and regulating individual landlords, or perhaps insisting that they need to use a licensed or regulated professional.
We know that there are some parts of the country that are licensing at the moment. I think the Nottingham area is very big on that. What are your thoughts on that, Peter?
Well, if licensing is used for the reason it was brought in the 2004 Act, it works, which is principally where there's a property or group of properties being poorly managed and causing problems. Therefore, that landlord or landlords get licensed so they can be controlled. It works from that point of view. Where it doesn't work is where just this mass licensing to earn money. That's what it's all for. And we question that in the Renters Reform Bill, we're not entirely sure how, but landlords are going to have to be registered, have an ombudsman or whatever. It's all coming together. So we question, well, hold on. If you've got to be registered, then therefore the local authority know where all the landlords are. That's that box ticked. If they've got to have all their certificates on the register, then again that's that box ticked. They're already, if they've been prosecuted, they'll go onto the horribly named Rogue Landlords Register. Tick. Why do we need licensing? And we've had no answer to that one at all. So you've always got to the situation where wouldn't it be easier if every single property was licensed and we had a flat level, we all knew where we were, and it's factored in, and who ends up paying licensing fees? Not you, the tenants. All these things, they all come back, and these bits of legislation that are supposed to protect the tenants end up biting them in one form or another.
Can we get a very brief response on that, Mark? Same point about licensing. On the face of it, you look at it and go, well, that's clearly a good idea. But I think we've just heard why there might be shortcomings.
It's a laudable objective. I think that, we're trying to professionalise the sector. If you're trying to increase standards, if you're going to have to comply in a situation where there is going to be an open register of landlords, in most other products and services you buy, you can go and look up a review on Google Review or Trustpilot or something similar. So what's not to say that landlords shouldn't be behaving in the same way? But actually, if the information's being centralised, then do we need local authorities running their own area like their own fiefdom? Perhaps we do, perhaps we don't. It seems a very interesting approach to a very intense level of deregulation where that's probably not necessary. You can talk about other things in the property management space where government has constantly looked at but failed to act. So, for instance, the regulation of property managing agents is something which perhaps ought to be done. They handle millions and millions of pounds worth of people's service charge money, but yet they're not mandated to become part of any accredited scheme. Should an individual landlord do that? Well, no. I think an appropriate level of licensing is all that's needed to ensure that we can sort out the good from the bad.
Okay, and I think we can get one more question in for our panel as a final point on this. Gentleman just over here. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
Okay.
Beautiful, in
Very
fact.
good. Thank you very much. Okay, my question relates to EPCs. Last year, EPCs were mentioned a lot. They were certainly driving my thinking about my Victorian portfolio. This year, they haven't been mentioned. We know they've gone quiet, but presumably haven't gone away. Will continue to be a big issue. What do you think's going to happen in the future?
This is a really good question, and that is spot on. It was all about the EPC. I think it was something politicians felt they could speak about, that people would understand. How efficient is your house? Have you got no roof on it, and therefore you're going to get a Z rating if that does exist? But it's gone a bit quiet. What's happened, Peter?
It's all again about politics. The thing we would say to you, it's not the EPC, it's something called a minimum energy efficiency standard, the level at which you can rent your property. We've, rightly or wrongfully, we've been advising landlords just to stay put at the moment until it's all made clear, because they're due to be revising the MEES, so it may be a C, maybe a D, we don't know, but the bigger thing is they're revising the EPC itself. So at the moment, the EPC, it works on cost saving. If you do something to your property that saves cost, you'll get a better EPC rating. It probably, we don't know for definite, it will probably change to be that if you save carbon, you'll get a better EPC rating. The biggest casualty out of that will be gas heating. So at the moment, you're not encouraged to put electric heating in. When the new EPC comes out, probably you will be substantially encouraged. So it's gone quiet because, quite frankly, I don't think the government know. They've just got themselves in such a mess, they really don't know.
Can we just get a final word then on that, Richard? And that sounds a fairly well-made point, that the government don't really know. It was all about the C, it was all about the C. Then maybe it was going to go to B, but then it went quiet.
No, I mean, I was getting increasingly frustrated about this, got to get to a C by 25, and an awful lot of mis-news reporting, a lot of scaremongering, and I'm sorry, some lenders played the game to encourage people to borrow money when they didn't need to spend tens of thousands on their properties to get them towards a C, and in some degrees, even having spent thousands, 10,000, they couldn't even achieve that. Plus a lot of this Victorian stock that we have, it's very, very difficult. Mid-terrace is okay, it's easier, but end terraces, detached, to try and get those with the build spec, the fabric of the property, to try and insulate them, to get them to those sort of measurement standards, very, very difficult. Where's it at now? Yeah, I don't know, it's a vacuum, because maybe to some degree they've gone, hang on, we've realised the consequences, and also how much money the government are going to have to put into it in order for these objectives to be achieved, and that is probably why it's all gone quiet.
There it is. In the meantime, that pretty much completes it. Can we just have a round of applause, please, for our panel? Peter Littlewood, Scott Marshall, Mark Chick, and Richard Bowser.